Before I reveal the identity of our next very, very exciting guest, I will say that I love each and every one of the interviewers that we've seen thus far. They're all very, very dear to my heart and among my closest friends in life. However, none of them do I love as much as the interviewer of the next event, who is my sister, Dana. So without further ado, Dana and Jaffa.
Hi, I am Dana Harmon, and I'm here with Joan Nathan, and this is brought to you, as Mishy said, by Tablet, and I love you too, Mishy. So Joan Nathan, she's a writer, she's a cook, and she is a very fabulous cookbook author. She has 11 cookbooks out. The most recent one is King Solomon's Table, a culinary exploration of Jewish cooking from around the world. Before that, there was Quiches, Kugels, and Couscous, my search for Jewish cooking in France. And perhaps the most iconic of them all was Jewish Cooking in America, which won the prestigious James Beard Award for Best American Cookbook in 1994. So if you're paying attention, you'll note that there's a theme here. It's cooking and it's Jewish. So I grew up with my mom, who's been the bestest of friends with Joni forever, telling me that Joan is the Julia Childs of Jewish cooking. Then I grew up and I realized that my mom didn't actually make that up. She actually is the unchallenged doyenne of the Jewish food world. So Joan not only writes about food and makes food and loves food, but she researches the histories and the stories and the Jewish stories really behind all of these dishes. So I am so happy to get to see you, Joni, and to have this interview with you. Hi. And I've been told to remind the audience you can participate in the chat and in the Q&A box and send in your questions so we can continue and ask Joni. Okay, so starting off, Joan, tell me a little bit about growing up. Where did food come into it? How did you get interested and fall in love with food stories?
All the time. My father was German and he loved food. He had traveled extensively, so he took me to different restaurants, and made me go to France to study in my junior year. And then I went to Israel in, I guess, in 1969, the summer of 1969. And that's really where I learned about Jewish food. And my first book was The Flavor of Jerusalem. It came out in 1975, and it was about the Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Jerusalem. And I worked for Teddy Kollek as his foreign press attaché. So as you probably remember, because I know you knew him, you were a little girl, he liked to eat. And he would take me and other people that worked for him to all the different communities of Jerusalem. So I fell in love with Jewish and other cooking through him. And, you know, he was one of these people who would eat not only what was on his plate, but everybody else's plate. So you would really get to feel, and he also taught me as a food writer, the importance of breaking ice through food. That food was a real human way of communicating with other people. And I believe it to this day. That's been my approach through all these years. I think really two things that I learned living in Israel for almost 3 years. That's where I met your parents. That's where I saw you for the first time. And not then, but later. He taught me about the role of food communicating with people, but also what I learned in Jerusalem were all the different kinds of Jews that have been like 100 different countries. So I remember actually going to your parents' house for Hanukkah one time, and they had, and your grandfather was washing the dishes in the kitchen. I remember that. But we didn't have potato latkes. We had memulaim, stuffed vegetables that were just delicious. And either a Moroccan or a Kurdish cook had made them for the dinner. And what was important were not presents, which, you know, were in the United States, which is part of the reason I never really liked Hanukkah, but it was the candles and it was being with family. And watching whatever was on Friday night politically. I remember that.
Would have made those stuffed. I don't think it was my grandmother or grandfather. I can't imagine it, but we'll check on that.
No,
Who made
they didn't make it. They had somebody else make it for them. Maybe a cleaning woman or something like that. But they were really wonderful.
What and then that brings me right into the next question, which is, what is Jewish food or Israeli food? Because just in the past, say, decade or even less, there's been such a renaissance. And the Israel story, the IsraPalooza started the day with Nir Masika making shakshuka. And Israeli food, as everyone knows, is such a phenomenon. The Israeli restaurants are the most popular ones in London and in Paris. But that's new. What originally, when you were learning about Jerusalem and about Israeli and Jewish food, what defines it? What is an Israeli food or a Jewish food?
Well, when I lived in Jerusalem in the early 70s, nobody talked about an Israeli cuisine per se. They talked about a mosaic of foods, all kinds of foods from different countries. Now those foods are becoming Israeli. However, shakshuka is North African. Everybody in North Africa makes shakshuka. So I couldn't say that was Israeli. Even in Turkey, there's shakshuka that was brought from North Africa to Turkey. So, and it's called something menemen in a way. It's a little bit like shakshuka. So, but what I see as Israeli food, it's becoming now. There's sort of a panoply of Israeli foods. For example, if you go to a Middle Eastern or an quote Israeli restaurant today, you'll see very upscale versions of all these recipes. However, you'll see some sort of Libyan recipes, like what's it called, the fish, the very spicy fish.
Yeah,
Everyone's making it. Everybody's making it. It's in my latest book. I can look there. But also, besides that, they'll be making mafroon, which is potatoes stuffed with meat, and that's something that's become the panoply of Israeli food. Hummus is Middle Eastern. Everybody made hummus. Actually, I brought some for you to salivate on that I just made this morning.
Oh my gosh.
So we'll later, but there's nothing like hot.
Oops. I think maybe, did Joni get stuck or
But anyway, so there's hummus. What?
I missed the very part of what you were saying about the hummus.
Well, the hummus was something it's pan Middle East. Chickpeas are the oldest protein known to the Western world. They've been around maybe 12,000 years. They were mentioned in in the Bible. It was mentioned in the Bible, but it was way, way before that. They found, I think, from 12,000 BC, chickpeas in Jordan. So everybody, today the world wants chickpeas because people are eating less meat, and they love hummus. I mean, it's crazy. Everybody does.
So a lot of these foods, I know that too, are not Israeli foods, but are now being marketed around the world in Israeli, and that's an issue. I have lots of, even Lebanese food. Is it Lebanese or is it Syrian? And there's something presumptuous or wrong about it? Who gets to call it their food, basically?
Well, whoever wants to call it their food, but it's regional. It's, when I go up to Galilee, for example, there's Galilee food now. There's Lebanese Galilee food. Druze food up north, a lot of the Za'atar. Za'atar differs up north in Israel and in Lebanon and also in Jordan with the whatever's in it. Some people use sumac, some don't. Some use salt, some don't. So that is regionally. And it's the same for, it used to be, when I first started writing about food, I always loved eggplant. I mean, that's why I loved Jerusalem. I felt Jerusalem was the eggplant capital of the world. And there was a big disparity when I lived in Israel between the fancy restaurant of the tourists and the mom and pa, dirty, wonderful restaurants of regular people. Those are the ones that I like. But anyway, there were so many kinds of eggplant recipes, especially in Moroccan Jewish homes. They'd have one that would have been steamed, like steamed eggplant that you would open up, and then one that they would fry. And every Shabbat, there'd be at least 2 different kinds of eggplant salads. There were just so many. And I realized in speaking to a lot of Moroccans that in Morocco, you were very proud of your own recipes and you didn't want to share from family to family, so that there'd be differentiations between families now because of the internet and TV and everything else. The borders have been blurred with all these foods. And so there are many, and also the different kinds of spices are now one spice, either Bahara or Ras El Hamoud. It doesn't really matter. But it used to be particular spices. And that's what made writing about food so interesting when I started out in 1972, just for a cookbook with Judy Stacy Goldman, who's now a guide in Israel. And from that, and I was just looking through the Flavor of Jerusalem, and I realized that so many of those recipes are still my favorite recipes to cook today.
Wow. By the way, I can't let this moment pass without saying that my dad makes one of the best chatzilim eggplant recipes, and it's so famous that it's in one of Joan's books. Am I right, Joan?
Check my Israeli cookbook. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to ask you a different question, which is, but it's connected to the sort of work you're doing in communities and history and stories of food. Now, where are you now during this coronavirus? Where am I finding?
I'm in New Orleans.
Okay.
My daughter is living here, and I'm having actually a very interesting time taking long walks on my own. I'm right around the corner from a wonderful Middle Eastern grocery store, so I have my mask, my gloves, and I go in there and I get my ingredients. It's literally 2 blocks away. So I'm able to do some testing for my memoir, which is coming out in a few years. And that's part of the reason, you're the real reason that I made the hummus, but I also wanted to make, this is a little bit different from the one I usually make, and it's Erez Komarovsky's recipe, who is, as you know, up near Lebanon.
Yes.
In Israel. Yeah.
So I'm finding that the one thing in common between many of my friends who are at home these days is everyone's cooking and everyone's taking pictures and everyone's so proud of themselves of what they're making. Even me, I've never cooked so much in the past couple weeks. What is it about the therapeutic nature of cooking? And I mean, a lot of people are on their own. I'm on my own. Or what is it about cooking and making your space and making your home that's going on in this moment now, in this coronavirus moment, where there's a lot of cooking?
Well, first of all, we can't go to, the pleasure of going to a restaurant is not there when you get carry out. I mean, I get it now for relief from cooking, but I do love cooking, but I like it especially now because I'm not pressured. We have a different sense of time right now. There's not all that much that's going on in our lives, so we have time to read, to watch great things on TV, and to cook. And I was thinking actually just about that when I was making this hummus today. I've been making a lot of things Middle Eastern that I love, that are things that I just love, like mujedra, lentils and rice, which are
it's my favorite. I love mujedra.
But you have to have a really good one. So I've made one, and my daughter asked for it again. I'm going to make it with bulgur this time. But anyway, it's really, when you're making hummus, to really make good hummus, you've got to just take your time. So I really did this morning. I was boiling the hummus and then the chickpeas, and I was skimming it carefully as I went along. And I realized it really turned out well. I mean, it always turns out pretty well, but this was I thought extremely good. And I think part of it is the slower, we've got time to do these things. We're not in a rush. So we have time to eat, we have time to cook, and we have time to really think about our lives right now. I can't tell you how many people say to me, I kind of like this, being able to be alone for a while, being able to be with myself, with my thoughts, my writing. I mean, it's terrible for all the people that are sick, and unfortunately, I know too many of them, many of whom have died. But trying to stay out of harm's way, I think that's what it is. My next door neighbor just emailed me. We did 100% Joan Nathan meal. We made my chicken with artichokes from the New York Times last week, and then my challah, and a chocolate cake for my books. And
Tony, do you think people will, just a quick follow-up, do you think people will go back to restaurants, or do you think that this is going to be I mean, of course they'll go back to some extent, but do you think this is really going to change the world and people are going to realize that they can make delicious food at home easily? Or do you think the communal thing of going out and the entertainment value is going to be stronger?
It's going to be both. There are so many people now that are making bread, and especially sourdough, making their own yeast. I mean, you realize sourdough really doesn't mean sourdough. It means just that you've taken yeast from the skies or from mushrooms or corn, whatever, and make it and then share it with other people. So people are really doing that today and making lots and lots of bread. And people have invited me over to just taste the bread, which has been quite delicious.
You've been going over.
I think it will be a little bit of both. I don't think restaurants where you're really packed in are going to be that popular. I mean, I could not imagine, for example, right now at this period, going to markets, especially in Israel, where you're cheek by jowl, and there's no way you would change the way people are going to those outdoor markets, I don't think. At this time, because it's too much of a way that people live, just going right in there and talking to and that's part of the fun of it.
I'm going to say that's part of the marvelousness of it.
Yeah. I mean,
some questions here. I'm going to read some questions that are coming in. So they're saying, who is Joan's favorite Israeli chef or food creator operating on the international scene these days? Do you have someone that you really?
Well, my favorite is Erez Komarovsky. I think that he's really, he has a restaurant that he sort of collaborated with in New York called Mint Kitchen, but he started Lechem Erez all around to Israel. So he was the first one to bring good bread to Israel. And now he just doesn't like what's going on. So he's living up in the Lebanese border. He has a wonderful garden, and he caters weddings and things in Tel Aviv that are quite fabulous. But he's just a real thinking chef, and there's nothing better than to go to his house and have lunch there or dinner. I never know what I'm going to get. Every time I go to Israel, I make the pilgrimage to his home, and sometimes I get to see him in the United States. But he's really a wonderful chef. He's my favorite.
By the way, that leads into something sort of connected, which says, if you were designing a culinary tour of Israel, which, by the way, Joan does, she brings lots of culinary tours to Israel, what's the one restaurant you would definitely include, if there's such a thing? Not the top one, but a couple or one or two.
You know, one of them, I am doing one for the New York Times in October. No, excuse me, March. October is Poland, but in March we're going to do one. I'll tell you what I like going to, what's it called, Morduch in where you'll get stuffed vegetables and you'll get kuba soup. We are also going to Eucalyptus, not because I think it's the best restaurant, but I think it's really interesting for Americans to see the history, of Jerusalem through food. And he really knows about biblical foods. And I think it's interesting for him to talk to people and to show the kind of foods that he does that have been around forever. And he's also involved with slow foods. There are a lot of very, very good, very talented chefs all over Israel. Anyway, but that's right now what I would do. Yeah.
Here's another question about, can we look forward to the incorporation of, this is from Rebecca from Seattle, can we look forward to the incorporation of Jewish cuisines from lesser known but very ancient Jewish communities, Afghanistan, India, into the concept of what Jewish food is? I think to a certain extent that's already happening. Yeah.
I guess I didn't answer that. Well, there's a difference between Jewish food and Israeli food, okay? But in a way, in Israeli food and Jewish food, I always say there are three things. The first thing are the dietary laws, no question in my mind. Also, the idea of Jewish food of moving from country to country and becoming regionalized with the dietary laws. And the third is food, and maybe that goes with the second, because Jews have been uprooted so many times, they've had to become, and they've kept the idea of the Sabbath within them for so long, that the traditional foods remain. And so it's easier to find traditional foods within families throughout history. And to me, those are the three things that define Jewish food. So that there's Afghani Jewish food, and that's what makes my life so interesting, because I'll see a cab driver, Tunisian cab driver in Paris, and I'll suddenly realize he's Jewish, and I'll get myself invited for Shabbat dinner because I'm interested in Tunisian food. And that's what I do all over. And, even I was in El Salvador for my last book, and it was Shabbat, and I think you know the family, I can't remember, but it was Tamar Plesner's family. Anyway, they were making, so one woman was making yucca latkes with cilantro cream instead of potato latkes, because that's what was available there. And, and so those are the gems that I try to pick from all these different countries. And in Israel today, it's only really the grandmothers that are doing this kind of food. And also in a lot of the small communities, small ethnic communities, where you're going to get like the Indian food and Kochi food, that's what you really want. You don't want it to become an amalgamation of everything else, of so Israeli food. So Israel is an important place to find it, but also communities all over the world. There are little communities that have like really good Polish food or
No,
or
it's
Russian
right
food.
into the next question. I got a good question, which is Jason Kleinman wants to know, what happened to, I'm adding in plain old, but he just said, what happened to Ashkenazi food? It's so hard to find in Israel, even in Jerusalem. No kugel, no gefilte fish. Is that true? Do you find that?
Well, it is difficult. It is difficult, but I think it will come back again. I do think, however, in baked goods, it's all Ashkenazi. So that the bakeries, they're the ones who are doing the Ashkenazi food. And I like Sephardic food or Middle Eastern food, but I'll take a schnecken or a babka or a plum tart from France. These are all Ashkenazic, and they're delicious. Hamantash, the way we know it, Ashkenazic. Challah, the way we know it, Ashkenazic. A little bit more sugar now than there ever was before, but it's the other foods that are there's less meat, and they're more Mediterranean. However, there is one person in Jerusalem, and I'm taking my group to his house for Shabbat dinner, and their parents are coming, and maybe you will if you're in Israel. His name is Shmuel, and he's going to do an Ashkenazic Shabbat dinner that's going to be amazing for us. And he's done the kind of research that I like to do to find the really good Ashkenazic recipes. But he's probably the only one that I know of in Israel.
Another interesting question from Edith Goldman. She says, what 5 ingredients do you always keep in your pantry? And what 5 spices do you always use?
Oh, that's a good
one.
Right.
Just throw out a couple.
Right. 5 ingredients. Yeah. I always like to have olives. I make my own preserved lemons, and you can, it's right in the recipes that Mishi's giving you has how to make preserved lemons, I think, in it. Let's see. I always like to have feta, because I make a lot of salads at lunchtime. Tuna fish, but good tuna fish with oil from Italy that I get at Costco. And the 5th, what would be the 5th? Some sort of a chutney, maybe. that I've made. And then as far as the spices, always cumin. I have cumin dipped in hard-boiled egg in the morning with salt, which I love. I learned that from Alice Waters. She does that too. Cumin, cinnamon, coriander, za'atar, and Aleppo lemon. Aleppo pepper. I love that. So I guess those are five.
Where do you find like Aleppo pepper? I wouldn't know where to begin.
You can find it almost everywhere now, but I got it in Turkey, the really good stuff, because they use it in Turkey, and of course they use it in Syria, but you have to get it through Turkey now.
I don't know how to put this, but you're an anthropologist, and you love the stories and the adventure of what you're going for. But how much does how good the food tastes matter? And like you present, going by how interesting the backstory is and the culture and the history behind it, or the actual deliciousness of the dish? Obviously, both.
Two things. It has to be two. If I don't think it's delicious, and if there's certain, I don't like a lot of false ingredients, and as soon as I see them, I'm not interested in the recipe. But I think it's the authenticity of the dish. And if I don't want to eat the dish, I can't, why should I put it in my book? It has to be something that I really want to eat. So that's what I try to put in my books. But I'll tell you, once I was doing something, a stuffed grape leaf, and Paula Walford, the cookbook writer, she didn't like my recipe. And I said, well, I didn't really like it that much either. And she said to me, you cannot do that in a cookbook. You must like every recipe that you're going to use. And she's right. So now what I'm doing is I'm looking through all my books to find out what are my favorite things to eat. And if I don't want to if it's not going to look beautiful and taste really good, then I just can't put it in the book. At least to me. They're my books.
They're coming in fast and furious, the questions here. Okay, here's one about where do you think the future of Israeli food is going? Do you see it going in any new direction?
Well, I think it's getting very fancy, but I think it's going to, that one of the things of this coronavirus, I think everybody's going back to basics and realizing, just in a way, the way the Intifada was in the 90s. Remember that? They went back to, what's my grandmother doing? What's my grandmother's food? And that I hope will happen even more. And I think that too, people, I mean, look at now, there's all over the place, there's, what is that? Cubana is so popular now.
What is it?
The overnight, the Yemenite bread. Remember when you and your dad were with me? I was looking for jachnoon. It was
yes, we ate, yes, we went with you to eat jachnoon in North Tel Aviv.
Right, on the beach. So that's the kind of stuff I like to find.
I've been on great adventures with Joan all over the world almost. Give us a story. What is like some crazy adventure that you fell into looking for a food story that you just looked around?
Well, I don't know necessarily look. I mean, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. Was when I was with Teddy Kollek, and there were these remember there was a Japanese, too young, Japanese terrorist incident in Israel at Lud, Ben Gurion Airport.
Barak, the hero on the wing of the plane?
Right, something like that. Anyway, that I don't remember. I just remember there were people that were hurt. So Teddy and I went to see them. And then afterwards, he said he wanted to go out to dinner. So I said, well, I knew this hole in the wall Moroccan restaurant. And I said, but he wouldn't want to go. He said, yeah, I want to go. So we went to this restaurant, and he could not believe how delicious it was. These were new immigrants from Morocco, and they had little pastilla that were so delicious, and stuffed vegetables that were so delicious. He said, and it cost $1 maybe for the two of us. And he said, all the Americans go to the King David Hotel and to whatever the Italian restaurant, your parents would remember it. There were these quasi-awful restaurants around, and they paid a fortune for them. And he said, they would never show up here. And of course, that made its way into the flavor of Jerusalem. But you never know if something's going to. I mean, it's the same with you with the story. No, you don't know what you're going to find, and it's like going fishing, and maybe that'll make its way into my memoir. I don't know, but there's so many stories like that.
Why did you decide to write a memoir now? What made you think that now's the time? And
it's the time. My last book, the King Solomon's Table, was sort of around the world, and basically this one is going to be called Joan Nathan, A Life in Search of Recipes. So it's going to be like, I'm calling something like Happy Hunting Hummus. And then I'm going to talk about what hummus was not a big deal when I was in Jerusalem. It was what people ate in the morning. Remember Abu Shukri? And you'd go in there, and he had this wonderful warm hummus, just like this one I made this morning. And you'd eat it in the morning. It had to always be warm. And then there was this place in Jerusalem that had it too. But now it's got this status. It's so like star status, and it's got broccoli on top of it and liver on top of it. It's a simple food, and it has been for generations, and it's for centuries, and it's a simple protein. And so I'm looking to go back to the simplicity, of dishes like that. And that's what I really like, rather than trying to update them so much that they're going to lose the specialness of what they are.
yeah, there was a question earlier, which I skipped, which said, what is your dad's eggplant recipe called? And I was trying to think, I was thinking, it's called chatzilim, eggplant. That's right. All.
Salat hatzilim.
Yeah. But there's a lot of holes in the wall. There's Abu Shukri, and there's a lot of them that people still go to, make pilgrimages to them, and they are still holes in the wall with pretty simple hummus, no?
Yes, Morduch is another one. There are a lot in Tel Aviv. I mean, there's one in Akko that I really love. It's a hummus place. I forget what it's called.
Abu Hassan here, near Jaffa, near me, right around the corner, Abu Hassan, which is super popular.
Oh yeah, it's the same thing, that they really were only hummus, and it was for protein to get you started in the morning. And they always started as morning restaurants, and now, I mean, in Washington, there's a hummusia in downtown Washington that's very popular, with all kinds of sides to the hummus. And it's only midday, it's lunch. But it was always the food that got you started. And then, of course, Israelis started eating it at dinner too. But in the United States, it wasn't really until Sabra hummus got started by an Israeli cab driver, I believe, in 1986, that, the people would get cold, refrigerated hummus that you could eat all the time. And it doesn't taste the same.
No. Joni, someone's asking, Michelle Raz is asking, what was your favorite food that your mom made you as a child?
Oh gosh. Well, I liked my mother's chicken cacciatore. It was really good. She also made plum tart for Rosh Hashanah, a Zwetschgen Kuchen with the blue plums that she made was of my father's family recipe. She made great rugula. She wasn't much of it. We had a cook when I was growing up, but she started to cook when I was in my teens.
You grew up in Rhode Island?
I was born in Rhode Island, then we moved to Larchmont, New York, and that's where we had a cook. And then we brought her back to Rhode Island. But my father had a downturn in business, so she had to leave. So my mother had to start cooking. And she was a good cook. She liked to cook.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. So let's choose a last question over here. Oh, what's Joan's favorite chicken soup recipe? How to make it in a word?
Oh, in a word. Well, actually, funny you should ask, because I've decided I'm putting in this new book the first chicken soup the Yemenite chicken soup with matzo balls, because who doesn't like matzo balls? But the Yemenite chicken soup has like fresh cilantro and fresh parsley and all kinds of zhug and all kinds of spices in it. It's healthy and it's flavorful. And I think that's what we want more. I mean, we love, who doesn't like chicken soup? But I think that chicken soup with a little bit smaller matzo balls where I put fresh ginger and nutmeg in, it's going to be really good.
Yum. Joni, it's made me hungry, and it's like midnight here, past midnight.
Well, thank you for doing that. This has been fun.
Thank you. It's so nice to see you. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Nice to see you. You too. Bye, dear.